Hello, this is Praccy, and this is going to be my review for Octodad, Dadliest Catch on the PC and soon coming to PS4. I've actually got the video of my first playthrough up somewhere on my YouTube channel, but it's nothing special, so don't feel as though you have to watch it. Well, in case you couldn't guess from the title, in this game you play as an octopus doing his best to masquerade as a human father, with everyone, including his family, being completely oblivious to his true identity. The only exception being his arch-nemesis, the chef, who is desperate to literally turn him into sushi. Despite the fact that he's done a very good job up until now, Octodad does find it very hard to do normal, everyday things. The fact that his body is so badly adapted to living on the land means that he can't do mostly anything without making a terrible mess, meaning that his life is mostly just a series of awkward situations. But despite all that, he seems to rather enjoy his role as a father in a family of four, even if it's never really adequately explained how things ended up in this situation. Now, I'm not entirely sure what genre of video game Octodad falls under. I guess I would tentatively say that it's a platforming game, but it's mixed heavily with a new genre of game that doesn't seem to have a name yet. I suppose I'd probably call them something like control-em-ups, seeing as they're games where the awkward controls form the core gameplay mechanics. So despite the fact that the gameplay for Octodad has nothing in common with QWOP, probably Archery and Surgeon Simulator, I think it's safe to say that all of these games owe each other a little bit of thanks, because this particular style of game is becoming more and more popular as time goes on, and I'd expect that we're going to see quite a lot more of them in the future. The gameplay almost entirely consists of the player battling the controls to try and force Octodad to do what they want him to do, without arousing so much suspicion that he's outed as being an octopus. You use either the mouse or your controller to control the height and direction of his tentacles, with the ability to toggle between using his legs or his arms. But regardless of which set of limbs you're opting to control at the time, you'll probably find that it still involves a lot of flailing around and awkward shuffling. However, despite the difficulty that you're going to have precisely controlling Octodad and his movements, I must say that I thought the controls were surprisingly intuitive. Once you get the hang of it, it's nowhere near as bad as it looks, which is a good thing too, because a game like this lives and dies by its control system. Unfortunately, there's no real way for me to adequately put into words exactly how the controls feel when you're playing the game, so despite the fact that it is a very important feature, I'm not really sure there's much more that I can say about it. The one thing that I can say is that there are very few moments in the game where the controls themselves felt responsible for your failings. Mostly if I died or screwed something up, I always felt as though it was my fault and not the controls, which I would actually say is an impressive feat for mostly any video game, especially one about a land-dwelling octopus.
Freezer door is working. Why are all these freezers frozen?
Aesthetically, things are actually great, with both the visual style and the soundtrack far exceeding my expectations for an indie game. The music does a good job of portraying the generally laid-back and mundane life of a father to an idyllic family unit, but still manages to steer itself away from becoming bland. And there's been a lot of attention paid to the environmental detail in particular, with every object being created to fit perfectly with its environment as well as being interactable with the physics system. Actually, there's lots of little touches and references to do with the environment that really rewards people who want to take the time to look around. The most obvious one being the Minecraft creeper block that hisses at you when you pick it up, as well as some sort of DVD rental machine with the name Commander Video on it, referring to the Bit Trip series. So the developers were obviously doing their best to get themselves some indie cred. I thought that the physics engine was largely excellent as well, but I suppose it better had be for this game, since a lot of the game involves picking things up and throwing them around. Everything seemed to behave as it should, and the objects seemed as though they had a real sort of weight to them. Also, I'd like to point out that I had no particular performance issues when playing this game, so that's one hell of a plus, and it contributes to the general sort of flawless feel of this game. So yeah, I thought everything to do with the presentation was excellent. Everything was smooth and nice, which contrasts very well with Octodad's terrible, awkward movements. Now, I want to talk quickly about the origins of Octodad. You might think this would be boring, but it's potentially going to benefit you directly. If Octodad seems like the sort of game that you could be interested in, then you're really in luck, because this is not the first game in the Octodad franchise, and the first game is freeware and very similar to this one. So I'll put a link to that down in the description to this video, and you can go and play that, treating it as a sort of demo for this game, even though it is in fact its own fully fledged game. Unless of course you already knew about all this, in which case I guess I'm sorry for wasting your time. But the two games are more or less identical in terms of gameplay, so it really is the perfect demo.
It's really simple. You can come to the aquarium with your family, or you can walk home alone.
Come on, Dad! What are you waiting for?
I'd like it if you could indulge me for a minute so that I can talk about something that probably shouldn't even really be featured in this review, which is the exact meaning of Octodad as a character. A lot of people have likened Octodad to being similar to somebody who suffers from an invisible illness or a disability such as social anxiety or depression, or maybe even something as serious as Parkinson's disease. His everyday life is clearly a lot more difficult than the people around him, and nobody really seems able to fully appreciate the sort of struggles that he experiences on a daily basis, leaving him as sort of an outsider character who has real problems fitting in despite the fact that he tries very hard. And I really think this is one of those rare times in a game when this particular undertone was actually intended by the developers and not simply a result of hipsters looking a little bit too deeply into things. I do really prefer to judge video games based on their merits in terms of gameplay rather than the message that they're trying to send out, but I really thought that this sort of fan theory was actually fun enough to think about that I should mention it, because if I'd realised during my first playthrough I might have looked at things a little bit more differently than I did. But I think it's nice that this undertone is subtle enough that if you actually want to, you can treat this game as simply being about a funny octopus in a suit. I must say I really did enjoy the story, even if it was very cliched indeed. I wouldn't say there were any real surprises to do with the plot, but the whole thing was just generally very well executed, and it has sort of a sweet Disney Pixar feel to the whole thing. So in conclusion, there's actually not too much to say about Octodad, and I mean that in the best way possible. I actually think that Octodad Dadliest Catch is rather close to being a perfect game. Not because it's truly a great game that's going to be remembered for decades to come, because it probably isn't, but rather because it achieved its own goals perfectly. The control system is obviously the star of the game, and I would say that it works correctly about 99% of the time, the remaining 1% being the fault of the camera usually, because that is admittedly a little bit crap, but I didn't really find it a serious enough problem to drag the game down. The presentation for the game is very clean, and I think it portrays what the developers wanted to in the most effective way that I can think of. Actually, even the humour is quite above average, with a lot of subtle jokes that aren't explained, and a severe rationing on the incessant meme referencing that has become a substitute for humour in a lot of video games recently. But, despite the fact that I have actually spent a lot of time seriously jerking this game off right into my face, there is one serious problem at the moment that will put a lot of people off, and I think rightly so. And that problem is mainly a one of price. I would say at best this game is going to take you about 3 hours to complete on your first playthrough, and that's even if you explore the environment quite a lot. Now admittedly you could try and extend the amount of time that this game lasts you by going achievement hunting or playing the co-op multiplayer with your friends, whereby each of you controls one of Octodad's limbs. But even with all that, I would still say this is a fairly short game, and with an asking price of £12 at the moment, I would say that is fairly steep. The length itself I wouldn't actually say is such a bad thing, because it does a good job of keeping the game from becoming repetitive, which it certainly would do if it was a little bit longer than it is. But anyone without a healthy bank account would do well to think about holding off on buying this game until it perhaps goes on sale, because if I'm brutally honest, the ratio of cost versus playtime comes out rather poorly for this game. But despite all that, I must say I really enjoyed Octodad Dadliest Catch a great deal, and I would highly recommend it to mostly anyone. But you are really going to have to try and make an informed decision as to whether you think that this game is worth the money as it currently is at the moment, or whether it would be best waiting to buy it when it's much cheaper. I hope this review was interesting to at least one person on this planet, because if it was, then it was, I guess, maybe worth the time recording it and whatnot. I'm hoping that I'll be able to do more reviews in future and shit out a few playthrough videos of whatever I happen to be playing at the time. So I guess I'll leave it here for now, and if I'm lucky, maybe I'll see you next time.